Welcome to Raven Talk, the official podcast of the Raven Tribe. The Raven Tribe is a home for warriors on the path, and is dedicated to training warriors for the battlefield of life. Visit us on the web at theraventribe.com, where you can learn more information on membership, warrior training, as well as links to our official YouTube channel, Facebook group, apparel store, and our official bookstore, Marshall Books.
Welcome back, Tribe. We're here with special guest, Grandmaster Edgardo Perez. Today we're going to be discussing the traditional Caribbean art of Guazabara. Maestro Perez, how are you doing today?
Good. I'm doing very good.
Good. Thank you for being on the show. And, Maestro, for the audience at home, could you tell us a little bit about your background in the martial arts and kind of what brought you up until the present day in your training?
I've been studying the martial arts since the late 1970s. I began training in my traditional system is Hapkido, and I began training in Hapkido under the Fowler brothers in Aurora, Illinois, back in 1978. After joining the military service, I was in the United States Air Force as security police. I continued my training in South Korea under Major Yu Chong-soo, Chong-soo Kwan, Hapkido, and Kumdo. And I've been training basically all that time, police, civilian, like I said, I was in the Air Force, I was a security police, and in 1988, I joined the police force and just recently retired after 28 years of service.
Now, Maestro, for the audience at home, they may not be aware of this martial art from the Caribbean. They might not have heard of Guazabara before. Can you tell us a little bit about what Guazabara is and how you became involved with it?
Sure. Anybody who has, the Puerto Rican or Caribbean ancestry has heard of Guazabara, and like I said, in English it's pronounced Guazabara, in Spanish it's Guazabara. Basically, the word itself is a Taino word, and it means, as many indigenous languages, it has multiple meanings, but the word Guazabara means fighter, warrior, hunter. It kind of falls, depending on the usage, into all that terminology. How I got involved in it, and like I said, everybody has heard of it because just about everybody I know will, if you ask them, you tell them, okay, my grandfather was involved in machete fighting, or they remember two guys fighting with machetes, and it was generally a very simple way, although very violent, to handle situations back in the Caribbean, back in the old days. Everybody carried a machete, and everybody learned how to fight with one. So what I did is I actually, after hearing stories after stories about that, and utilizing my formal martial arts training, I began to have interviews with different people, and for them to describe to me exactly the movements, how they were done, and they would tell me the different ways they performed those combat moves. And what I would do is, like I said, I would jot these down, and try to find ways to take what I knew was different types of fighting skills that was utilized by different people, mostly, and for my part, mostly in the mountains of Camuy, Lares, and the Arecibo area, the Tuado area. Those areas where that's where my family is from, and utilize those skills and try to put it into some kind of formalized martial arts training. Back in the middle to late 1990s, I had I'm a student of Filipino martial arts as well, and I had the privilege of training with Guru Dan Inosano, and I had talked to him about that, and I remember because we had a discussion about his system of Mafalindo Salat, and I talked about Guazabara. And what he had told me to do, and I used his information to heart, he told me to gather as much as I can on the system and bring it back to life. So basically, that's what I did. At that time, I took everything I could. I formalized it into different levels, and I brought the system, what I put as a system, back to life, in the hopes of not just bringing something that's indigenous to the Caribbean, but also in showing respect to our ancestors and not forgetting something that they were doing for us and utilizing that into the modern world.
Now, Maestro Perez, when you talk about doing research, you're not talking about going on the internet or reading about this in books. You actually went down and tracked this down with the elders in Puerto Rico. Tell me about the experience and tell me a little bit about the individuals that you got to interact with there.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. The only information that I ever got from the internet was just some information on history and way back what happened before. The Guasabara, the information I got on that is pure. It started with my grandfather, my own dad, telling me about the stories, and that's where we're talking way back when I was a kid and hearing all these stories and stuff and having the interest in it. What I had done, like I said, is I had gone to I'd speak to one person, and he would tell me a story, and he would explain to me the different moves, and I'd jot that down. And that guy would say, "Okay, mira, pero go talk to Fulano, who's up on the hill over there in a loma, and ask him because his father was involved." And then I do that, and that's how I did it. And this is not something that happened overnight. This is something that happened through a long period of time. By the time Guazabara was formed, I formed it. Actually formed it in 2001. But way before that, I was already doing Guazabara, and I had incorporated into just regular machete fighting without a formalized name, and I was utilizing all the information I was getting. But we're talking like a 10-year period of just gathering information and going over different things. And I'm not done yet. I'm still going. Every time I go back to Puerto Rico, I talk to somebody else, and somebody else gives me something new that I didn't hear before. And I would tell, like I said, I tell everybody, if you have your family still in Puerto Rico or in Cuba or in Santo Domingo, and these, take these stories, and if you have formalized martial arts training, incorporate this stuff, because Guasabara is fine, but it's not just I put it together, but it belongs to everybody. And that's what the thing is. It's a tribute to not just our ancestors, but it's also remembrance for them and to them, and something that we can use in the modern world today.
Now, Maestro Perez, can you tell us a little bit about the Caribbean, specifically Puerto Rico? Because it is not really one culture that's found there, but it's multiple cultures. And I'd like to know, what were the elements of Guasabara? Were they coming from from which group of people? The Africans in Puerto Rico, the Taínos, or, people from Spanish descent?
Now, I'm glad you asked that, because that's very important. Now, it was interesting that sometimes as I talked to different people, there was different systems and ways that they used the Guasabara. One specifically was that they would tie wrist to wrist. In this case, if both subjects, guys involved, were right-handed, they would put the machetes in their right hands, or strong side, they would tie their left hands wrist to wrist. When they did that, they would fight that way and use it as ties, or they would fight leg to leg, so that everything had to be CQB, everything had to be close quarter inside there. Now, talking to others, I remember speaking to one guy in Camuy, and he said he believed, not sure, he said he believed that basic part came from the days of slavery, and it was something that the Spanish would do to the Africans to make them, while they're chained together, make them fight with machetes, and somehow it carried over. Now, I'm not sure if that's the case, and that's actually how it happened, but that's what he told me he believed, and he said that's the only connection they had. There was other things, like this one, we jokingly, but I use it a lot, call it a zebra kick. It's a spinning kick that you just, real close to the body, you just kick the person in the side. Now, there was no kicking or anything in the Caribbean martial arts or anything. One of the guys had told me, and this was also in Camuy, that he believed that came from the Yoruba people in Africa. So there was a strong connection between the people of the Mandinka, the Yoruba, those people, and we know it in our culture, but they're also involved in the fighting arts. Remember, and keep this in mind, in Puerto Rico and in the Taino culture, it's a matrilineal culture. In other words, the mother dictates the lineage of the family. So regardless of what the father was, if the mother was Taína, the son was Taíno. You understand?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So if a person escaped from Africa and escaped into the jungle, they were taken in by a lot of the free escaped Taíno people that still lived inside. And I'll go back, and if you I'll give you a little bit details, a little bit more on that later. But and what happened is a lot of these people, they were taken in. As a matter of fact, the Spanish have it on their records that they started referring to them as black Tainos because they started seeing black slaves that were brought in from Africa directly, not born on the island, but brought directly from Africa, escaped, and all of a sudden they would be attacked by them, but these same slaves would be wearing Taino jewelry and Taino regalia on them, which means they had been taken into the tribe. So for the Africans, the slaves, they had felt that they at least were welcomed by the people, and children from them were still considered Taino. So whatever the cultures they brought there. Now here's another thing to keep in mind. When the first slaves came, slavery was their Spain's one big way to make money, because they weren't getting enough gold anymore, so they had to do something. So there is the birth of the Atlantic slave trade. What happened is in Africa there was a lot of tribes warring against each other, and the Spanish had a certain directive. One of the directives is they didn't want any slaves from the warring tribes because they made terrible slaves. Warriors don't make good slaves. They're born free. They're trained to fight. They make terrible slaves. They'd rather die than be slaves. So it's not even cost effective for the Spaniards. But what would happen was Africans would capture their enemies and sell them into slavery, and so those warriors were still crossing the Atlantic, and they were still and many of the traditions that we have, whether it's through Guazabara or Kalinda, or even so much as your African foot fighting arts from Brazil, those are directly related to your warring tribes that technically were not supposed to be brought in, but you're talking about the Mandinka people, the Yoruba people, those kind of people. And I want to paraphrase this. By telling you this, that when Puerto Rico was one of the smaller islands, it was a gateway, a stopping point for the rest of the islands and the mainland when it was discovered. So there's like a 200-year period of time when Spain and the rest of the world was so busy colonizing the mainland and the other islands that all they were concerned about was the shores of Puerto Rico, not so much the interior. It wasn't until like those 200 years had passed and every bit of piece of land was being scraped up that they started going for more. And in those 200 years, a lot happened to our people while they were still hiding inside there. You understand?
Absolutely. And I think it should be well noted, too, that the Caribbean in general, and especially in Puerto Rico, it has a very different way of addressing new cultural items. I mean, the Caribbean is known for cultural synthesis. It's not like other cultures where they may be very separatist and want to keep foreign elements out of their traditions. But like I said, the Caribbean in general is very well noted in their music and their art, and obviously even in their fighting. That they found something of use or value, they found the beauty of it, and they took it and incorporated it into what they were doing.
Absolutely, and remember something else too. Puerto Rico wasn't just a gateway for Spain when they came into the mainland or to this hemisphere. Puerto Rico had always been the gateway between the Taino people and the Caribe people. The Taino people and the Caribe people have been at war. Cuba, the island that is Santo Domingo, or it's really Quisqueya, and Cuba, they didn't have to deal with the Caribe because it was the Caribe fighting with the Borican Tainos. They were the more warlike ones out of all the Taino. And I don't say this simply because I have a personal attachment. It's just history. It was the Borican Tainos that were constantly at war with the Caribe, and that was stopping the Caribe from pushing in to the Upper Antilles. So you're looking at Puerto Rico. Remember, Puerto Rico is one small island, but it also consists of several islands. And a case in point is Vieques was a Caribe island. Vieques belonged to the Caribe. So that's how much at war. I mean, they were right there constantly fighting. Matter of fact, I go so far to say there's a good possibility that if Christopher Columbus had landed in Puerto Rico, he might have never gone even back to Spain, because those Tainos were much more aggressive than their brothers and sisters to the west.
Now, Maestro Perez, the Guazabara is known as machete fighting now, machete fencing, but that's not the original incarnation of the weaponry used. Tell us about the weapons that the original Tainos used.
One of the original weapons that was used by the Taino was the macana. And a traditional macana is a wooden fire hardened stick that actually is very similar to the ones you would have seen in all the other islands, as well as in Mexico and in South America. It's a flat style, almost looks like a wooden sword or wooden paddle type of thing, and it varies in size. It varies from a very short one, about the length of your arm, to a very long one that can be used by two hands. These things were bone breakers. They were designed to break through the bones and hit really hard. So all the movements in utilizing a macana, traditional macana, and like I said, the word is still used today. I mean, the police in Puerto Rico, when they carry a nightstick is considered a macana. That just means in today's day, that carried over to means a fighting stick. But the traditional macana was used in circular motions. It was used to spin around. You can't stop something that heavy and keep going back and forth. It was used to spin as quick as you could and break the bones. You break the collarbones. You break the head. You break the arms. They were bone breakers. That's what it was designed for. Especially as big as it was, it could go low and sweep the legs, or sweep up high and break the collarbone.
Now, when did they transition over to the use of the iron machetes?
At the time of the conquest, when the Spanish started, taking as many Tainos as they could and turn them into slavery, the machete was used it wasn't used as, keep in mind, it wasn't used as a weapon. It was used as an article of husbandry, a tool of husbandry. It was just used for farming. Utilizing the machete was what we're transitioning now from the traditional Taino to what we refer to as the Jibaro, the poor people of the Caribbean, which were the people who worked the land. They took the movements and stuff and the same ones and incorporated that into what they learned from their grandfathers, into the macana, into a machete. And it wasn't looked upon much different, because a machete was allowed to be used as long as it was being used when you were in the field and everything like that. It just turned out that when they had fights and they had wars, the only weapon they had was this inferior blade, which was a machete. So the machete came much later, but it incorporated the same moves that they'd found with the macana. Now, also keep in mind that when these Spaniards came, they came with Toledo steel. It was the strong, powerful steel that'll cut through a machete and break a hand with no problem at all. So those who, when they did go against them, they learn to avoid the blade more than make direct contact with. So in a lot of what you see today in Guazabara is not blade-to-blade fighting like you would see in a European-style fight. It's more avoidance of the blade until I can get in and cut.
Now, with the Spanish, in Puerto Rico, was there a cross-pollination of Spanish sword methods? Was there any influence on Guazabara?
Yes, there was, and here it is right here. Remember before when I spoke to you about that 200-300 year gap when they were kind of ignored? Puerto Rico was kind of ignored.
Yes.
Well, but when that happened, a lot Puerto Rico's culture began to change. But something happened in Europe too. Europe's traditional Spanish blade fighting changed from the way they had done it originally to the more modern way that came much later. And here's what happened. And if I'll have to try to picture this so the listeners can understand where I'm coming from. When they were in a fighting position, a blade in front. Let's say they're doing espada y daga. Blade in front. The body was more square, facing the opponent more in front. That changed after a couple hundred years to the body being more bladed and your weak side being more further to the back with your strong side forward. You picture what I'm saying?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and the reason for that is a lot of times guys would grab, which was considered a poor style, poor form. Guys would actually grab the blade because it was easier to grab the blade and get your hand cut up, but you could still form basically a death strike when you did that. So I would sacrifice grabbing the blade and having my hand cut up to put a blade into your chest.
Interesting.
Well, what happened was when guys were doing that, the aristocrats at that time were saying, okay, that's considered bad form. So the gentlemen of Europe kind of changed it around, so now their stance was more further back. While Europe is making those changes, the Caribbean people and in places like in Mexico, a place like that where there was already Spanish influence, those changes didn't occur there. Because remember, these weren't aristocrats we're talking about here. These were second and third generations, already fourth generations, being born on the island. Many of those people that were already mixers, they were mestizo people, were already being ignored by Spain.
Now, Maestro, what besides the macana and its extension into the machete, what other weapons are taught in the system?
There's the manaya, which is the axe, and I teach that later on in the higher parts. The manaya is an axe. It wasn't used as much because when the machete was introduced to Puerto Rico, the manaya was almost ignored. It was just the machete just had so much multiple purposes that it wasn't used as much. So there's the traditional macana. There's the machete, obviously. There's the manaya, which is the axe. I also use a whip, a chuso, which is like a whip-like tip with a tip that has a weighted end that uses strike and draw it back. So there's a couple other exotic weapons that are used. And then there's the free hand, which is tatacabo. Tatacabo is the Taino word for the hard hand, open hand. And those are when you fight tatacabo, it's usually very close to the body and a lot of strikes to the vital areas.
Now, what about the empty hand techniques?
That's what I'm talking about. Yeah, the empty hand techniques are tatacabo techniques.
Okay.
And everything in tatacabo is all empty hand. It's either empty hand versus weapons or empty hand to empty hand. And everything is based on very close to the body and striking the vital areas.
So it's more of a striking art than a grappling art?
It's much more of a striking art, yes. Okay. And here's another thing too. When it comes to especially when it comes to the daga, which is the short knives, and the daga is considered that's all part of the machete, but there is no disarming in Guazabara. And everybody always asks me about this, like how is there no disarming technique? And I'm sorry to say, I'm not gonna make up something that didn't exist. Every time I talk to somebody about that, they looked at me like I had two heads. They were everybody, and after a while, I agree with this positioning on this. Guazabara doesn't have any disarming techniques because everything in Guazabara is made for counterattack. You attack me, I counterattack. So I'm not going to try to disarm you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try to hurt you as much as I can, and then it's a moot point. In the attempt to disarm somebody, I have to have that person's better interest at heart. I'm trying to disarm them. Why would I disarm somebody when they're trying to hurt me? I'm going to hurt them worse, and then disarming somebody is a moot point.
Now, Maestro, the fencing system with the machete, can you tell us a little bit about that, about the mechanics? I've been able to train some of it with you. I fell in love with it. Give us a little bit of compare and contrast with maybe, European methods or maybe Filipino methods that other people might be, more familiar with. What stands out as a difference with the Guazabara than what you see in those other arts?
Well, Guazabara is simple. That's the best way I can tell. I look at it this. When I see people performing Esgrima or Salat, it's like looking at a Corvette. A Maserati. I think it's beautiful and it's beautiful and deadly. Guazabara is more like looking at a dump truck. You understand? It gets you where you need to go, but it's simple. And that's exactly what a street fight with blades would be: simple, fast, and quick. Now, once the motion of the machete moves and starts going around, everything is circular. It doesn't stop. So you're not going to see shortcuts and withdrawals. You're going to see constant circular motion. The other thing is the tip of the blade is always aimed at the opponent. So in an example of this, you'd see like in a Filipino martial arts, you might see somebody doing stick fighting or espada daga, and you might see as they're chambered for a strike, you'll see the tip of the blade aiming behind the person as they're chambered in position. You understand, Vernon?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so in Guazabara, you could be chambered in the same position, except the tip of the blade is always going to be aimed at the opponent. And the reason for that is you always expect to charge. You always expect to be attacked. Plus, I always keep in mind that the thrusting the blade is just as important as being able to sweep the blade. So a lot of that, when I bring my arm back and forth, a lot of the movements are controlled by the elbow as it comes to the other side of the body, and the tip of the blade is always aimed at the opponent. And it's, like I said, it's a constant motion going back and forth.
Now, Maestro, tell me a little bit about your efforts to keep this art alive, to promote it. One thing I found very interesting, if you could share with us, is that some of the Taino groups, the ethnic groups, actually recognized you as a formal instructor of this art. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, what I did is, remember when I told you that I was gathering as much information as I could?
Yes.
I reached out to a lot of these groups, and I don't want to say any single names because there's a lot of them, and I don't want to forget anybody or leave anybody out. But I reached out a lot to a lot of these groups, and explained to what I was doing and how I was doing it, and many of them were very supportive. Since then, there's been a couple that have gone and started their own, whether it's machete fighting or Taino old tradition. You'll see it out there, and I don't take that as an insult at all. I'm more power to the guys who are doing that. It's a blessing to our ancestors. Guazabara as a formal name everything is mine, and it belongs to everybody who that trains in it. But the Taino culture belongs to all of us. And so a lot of these guys, they understood what I was trying to do, and they knew the stories. They heard the stories. As a matter of fact, it was funny that some of them actually started sharing stories with me, and we joke around. And I know you and I have talked about the same thing, and you've heard the stories too. So this is I think everybody understands that as a martial art, it's a tribute, and it's a tribute to our ancestors. But it's also not. It's not just that. It's a good fighting system that's I would say not overly complicated, but can be utilized in today's modern world.
And how do you go about teaching this art now? Are you teaching seminars? Are you teaching at your school in Illinois? How can people come out and learn this art?
Oh, I teach everything. A lot of people have come up to me and asked me, do I have videos? Do I have DVDs? All this stuff. And I tell them, no, I'm a traditionalist. And Vernon, you and I have known, I'm actually to the point where I'm actually a very hard guy to get a hold of. And you know that, But I'm a traditionalist. I like working with people one-on-one. I like to meet them. I like to do it. I'm not interested in trying to grow something so big that I'm interested in the roots, the raíces. I want to do everything slow enough so that it has such a good foundation that it grows strong. I've had students that I've trained for years, and now I've got 2 students in Washington State that have now started to spread Guazabara over there. So Guazabara is spreading on the West Coast. Very soon, if you open me with the grace of God, we're gonna spread another school to the southern states. I've got guys interested in on the East Coast that they're part of our federation as well as you are. They're part of our federation. They're formally trained in certain areas, but not formally trained as full instructors. Now, that being said, a full instructor is a guy who's trained with me personally for years and gotten their black belt. Okay? Now, there's also levels of instructors. So, Vernon, you can come to me and we can train, and I can train you in your first level. And you'll be considered a first level instructor. So that means you can train everybody up to the first level until you achieve your second level. You understand? So unlike other systems, it's designed by levels, and it goes by your white belt, your white red white, and it goes on like that. But every level can train the level before. So unlike other systems, because there's so much involved in it, I want every level to be an instructor for the level before. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes, sir. Yes.
We're all teachers. We're all teachers in this. So the minute you start learning to teach. So you're learning on 2 levels. You're learning for yourself, but you're also learning to pass it on to the next person. And that, like I said, and when it comes to our DVDs and stuff like that, if I can't have the personal touch, I really don't want to do it. I want to be with people. I want to know who's training, and I want to actually shake their hands and say, okay, I know this person.
Maestro, the history is fascinating. The actual techniques are fascinating. I've trained a lot of knife work, a lot of blade work, and Guazabara is actually something that's very unique in my opinion. I haven't seen many people doing what you do. There's another element to it as well, and I want to get your thoughts on this. You said it. You are a traditionalist. I know you for many, many years now, and you're one of the people that comes to mind when I think of what a real warrior is. What are the lessons regarding warriorship in Guazabara? What did you learn from that culture, regarding warriorship, and what is it that you pass on to your students?
Here's the biggest thing, okay? And we play and banter that word a lot, okay? Okay, hold on. I'm getting we planter and banter with that word a lot, but warrior means a person who's trained to fight and willing to stand up for those who cannot. I always push, and this is what I tell, and I'll leave you with this. I always push in Guazabara and say it is our job and our duty as warriors to do what we can to leave this world a better place than when we arrived. And that's the biggest thing I tell everybody. Leave the world a better place. It's not about the fight. It's about being a better, stronger person and being able to stand up for those who cannot stand up for themselves.
I want to thank you for being on the show. It was great having you on. Hopefully we get you back out in the future.
All right, you take care.
All right, bye-bye.